So Wade, when we think about storytelling, which is not a term that we would normally associate in a business context, how did you get involved in this area?
So my background has been in improvised comedy. So walking out on stage for the last 20 years, not knowing what you can do or say next, and you learn what makes an effective story, what keeps people wanting more, and how to really connect with people. It's the kind of actor's job to recreate the human experience, and that's what I do on stage.
So is this something that you took as an interest and then suddenly thought, hang on, there might be a business opportunity in there as well?
Yes, so I was doing originally I was doing corporate entertainment with my Improv Bandits, and people came up and started saying, "Oh, we love the show, but how do we get our people to work together and communicate and be creative like you guys?" And so I saw a business opportunity there and started developing some experiential training programs using improv. It's a wonderful vehicle for adults to learn learning through play and having fun. And then I partnered up with Steve Hill, and we started doing storytelling inside organisations, and then that business then morphed into another business, Mind Warriors, which we're doing Jolt together, and I've kind of picked up the storytelling by myself because of my expertise in it, of learning narrative and teaching narrative. But then I've taken it away from the stage and put it into a business context. So what I do is I don't teach people how to be improv actors in organisations. I teach them how to become the principles of storytelling, organisational storytelling.
And this has been known over the years under different guises, and storytelling really wouldn't have been the way you described it 10 years ago, and yet it's kind of come into vogue. Well, why do you think that the sudden interest in storytelling?
I think in the past storytelling has been, I know working with Vodafone 10 years ago, we couldn't call it storytelling. They said it has to be called, I think the term was communicating with impact. So, because it was just too airy-fairy. But now I think with the advances in science and neuroscience particularly, so understanding how the brain works and so forth, and just the evolution of us as a species and the evolution of business, people realise and can see that storytelling makes sense. Organisational storytelling makes sense, and that it's a very powerful way of connecting with people.
So just before we talk a bit about that, what is some of the neuroscience telling you about why this really does engage people?
Well, the neuroscience shows us that there is no a split between the way we think and the way that we feel, and that we're actually more rationalizing beings. So we'll make emotional decisions and then rationalize it after the fact, rather than thinking that we're actually rational and logical beings. So if you're looking to connect with people, you need to be talking to the emotions, and storytelling does that. And so facts and figures are great. You don't throw them out the window, but you need to start wrapping them up in a story so that it becomes more memorable with it as well. We remember things when they're in a story rather than just a list of, you've seen the PowerPoint slides of facts and figures, or whether it's a new vision or the values or a strategy, it quickly falls out of memory.
So can you actually teach people this, or are people distinguished by whether or not they're natural storytellers or not?
Well, we've all grown up with stories. Everyone's been a child, so they've all had stories read to them. It's really how our brain makes sense of the world, is through narrative. We don't do random very well. We have a part of our brain that is always looking for meaning, and that's what storytelling conveys. So it's a powerful way of just communicating your message.
So when you're teaching people this, what are you teaching them? What's the method that you're suggesting people adopt?
So I use a very simple methodology. That's why I'm popular, I think, because it's simple and effective for people. There's a lot of theory around there in storytelling, but my interest is always around making it practical. And I have a very simple methodology that's been tried and tested on stage for 20 years. Which is all around making sure that someone or something undergoes change. That's pretty much the number one rule with storytelling.
And therefore, what sort of headspace do people have to be in to take this on?
The headspace, storytelling makes sense for people intuitively. We all have the ability to be a storyteller, but that doesn't mean natural talent is enough. There's plenty of people run fast. They're not all running at the Olympics. You have to work at it. So there is that the crafting and the skill set to work on. But we can all do it, and it's just really. And I guess I help people move away from being a presenter of information to become a storyteller. So just the headspace that to be human is to be a storyteller, and that you're going to get much more effective results if you become a storyteller rather than just a presenter.
How challenging do you find it is to get your average CEO or person in a senior role to suddenly think of themselves as a storyteller?
Well, it's quite simple actually. Once you redefine what storytelling is, you help them, because some people do think storytelling is once upon a time, fairy tales or whatever it may be, and I kind of help people realize, show people that it's not about that, or not just limited to that. And as soon as you start talking to them in examples, as soon as you say, let me tell you an example, you're about to hear a story, it just makes real sense for them.
When you look around the world, the research is quite conclusive on this. This is not something that's a fairly loose bit of thinking that's suddenly become into vogue effectively.
Yeah, there's a lot of science behind it, and I also find you usually find a lot of the HR people are amazed at how I can get engineers or very left brain process people engaged in storytelling, and that's simply because I frame the why. Storytelling and why organisational storytelling in particular is important in their day-to-day lives. So it's not something that another skill that leaders have to learn. It's actually the way they do everything that they do. It's through storytelling.
It's interesting because there's debate also around creativity in a similar vein, isn't it? That we're born creative and then we kind of grow out of it. And do you think the same applies with our attitude to the way we communicate as well?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's not. It's storytelling and creativity. Obviously, the work that I do, and coming from the world of improvisation, they're joined at the hip. They're not two things separate. When you're a storyteller, you're having to be creative, and when you're being creative, often you'll find storytelling lies at the heart of that as well.
Who are the people that respond best to this? Do you find is there a type of person, or can it apply to just about anybody?
Just for anybody. I mean, to be human is to be a storyteller. So, but obviously. People will vary in levels of engagement with it, and I think the thing I've learned over the last decade plus is not to assume. People who you think are going to be very resistant to it end up being your biggest supporters of it as well, and really running with it. So I've worked on many organisations, many different levels of an organisation, usually around leadership, because the stories that I focus on getting leaders to tell, but anyone and everyone can embrace this and do well with it.
You've worked with a wide range of clients, even including the IRD.
Yes, and they've been fantastic in embracing the role of storytelling, and organisations around new vision and new values rollout, dealing with change through the stories. So yeah, a lot of organisations.
What do you find is the most noticeable outcome once this is adopted?
Well, using the IRD as an example, you could see in some of the sessions there, and they did it from some of the senior people, in fact, people from all across the organisation, and people become more engaged. Because the types of stories around, if you're looking at what's the purpose of the organisation, something like the IRD go from a self-image of, we're the dreaded tax man, into actually we're responsible for the economic well-being of a nation. So it's a very different story. And as I always point out to people, the most important story you tell is the one that you tell yourself every day in your head. So just getting people to reframe and look through a different lens of the story that they're telling themselves about who they work for, what's the purpose of the organisation, so that they feel engaged to it.
How quickly can you achieve this sort of transformation? Is this like a one-day course, and you can be a gifted storyteller by the end?
I'm a magician. I bring my wand to every session, and it will vary. It will be. It can be, if you're looking at things like 1 to 2 hours and stuff, you're just looking at an awareness exercise. I think that what gives me a lot of satisfaction is getting in there and actually helping people craft their stories, take them through the science side of things, and making it kind of really a skill that they can develop. So yeah, 2 days is great. After 2 days, you can walk away with a great appreciation of what storytelling is, and even some stories that you can put to immediate use. I'm very tool-orientated, tool-focused. I want people to walk out with stuff that they can use straight away.
How much do you find the improv gives you a decided advantage in all of this?
Well, that's where the theory the theory comes to life through the improv. It's a wonderful, I said before, it's a wonderful tool for self-creation, self-expression, self-discovery, and it's just I guess one of the big things that creates a sense of play. So the barriers between people drop. And using humour is the number one way to connect with people. So it's a very powerful art form and creates that whole experiential learning experience for people.
What about ages? Is it easier for young people to adopt this, and then take it into adult life, or can those in their late career equally pick up on it as successfully?
I think the older you are, often the more set in the ways you can be, but also the more stories that you'll have to share, and your whole life is a database of stories. So it's I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. Young people can use it and tell stories and be engaged in the work that they do, and the older people can lead by example through the stories that they tell.
And as a communication tool, you must find it becomes quite liberating for people once they actually feel that they've got a toolkit that they can use.
Yeah, and it's a total reframe for people. To be a storyteller makes a lot more intuitive sense than to be a presenter. It's not everyone's favourite to stand at the front of the room, and the principles of storytelling are relevant whether it's one-to-one in a coaching situation as a leader or manager, or one-to-many if you're a new strategy rollout or whatever it may be, and it just makes people feel more comfortable when they think of it through the frame of storytelling, rather than all this information that they've got to get through. And that's kind of the power of storytelling. It just cuts straight to the meaning of it. You can get rid of a lot of the, we're an information overload in this day and age, so it just really cuts to the heart of the message that you want to communicate.
Obviously, you mentioned this is a couple of days course, but if you're giving people some immediate ideas to take away, what do you suggest people do to just begin to embrace some of the broader concepts of what it is you're proposing?
So the thing is to know what kind of story that you're doing. I talk about the 5 stories, the future stories, which might be the vision of an organisation or a strategy story. Then you've got your identity story, so you reveal yourself through the stories that you share. I use the lovely line that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So the way that you reveal yourself through stories. Then you've got your values. There's plenty of organisations who have values that live on a poster on the wall and so forth, and aren't being lived and breathed in the organisation. And then the kind of the stories that engage the hearts and minds as well. So the number one thing is to know what story. And what is your purpose for communicating to these people? Is it a team meeting? Is it to inspire? Is it to influence? Is it to coach? Is it to share some knowledge as well? So know what the point of your story is, and then there's always, as I said before, there's always got to be someone or something that's going to undergo change. Otherwise, why are you talking to them?
Does this need to be led from the top by a chief executive, or can it also be bottom up?
Usually, to be a storytelling organisation, to make that shift, it's got to be led from the top. If you're asking people mid-management or lower, what is the purpose of the organisation, they're always going to look up the food chain to see what the purpose is. So really you need to have the CEO or managing director very, very clear on what the purpose is and what is the story. And then ideally it would get personalised by the exec team and then the senior leaders and so forth. They would personalise that story so it's relevant to their business unit, rather than there's no one story fits all. I think that's really important to understand as well.
Do organisations need to get a certain set of criteria lined up though before you can adopt this?
Yeah, well, they need to be clear on what their vision is, what their reason for being, their purpose is. They need to know what the values are and the behaviours that they're looking for underneath that. And then when it comes to communicating those things, that's where the role of storytelling really comes to the fore.
So how do you characterise the current state of communication generally across the landscape when you look at corporates and businesses that are trying to communicate every day? How do you characterise it?
Oh, well, the thing that I see that is largely missing is that not enough leaders are telling people the purpose of the organisation. If we think as a basic human need, if you look at this may come as a shock for you, Andrew, but we're all going to die, you and I included. Yeah. And if we're lucky enough to live a long, full life, we want to look back and go, did my life have meaning? Did it have purpose? And organisations give that to people. They offer the opportunity. It's like the modern day tribes. You get to belong to something bigger than yourself. And this is the point. If the leaders are telling that story, you don't have to worry about bribing people with tickets to the rugby or the opera or the cricket or whatever it may be to get them to engage, because people will willingly give their time and energy if they feel that they are having their needs met and are living a life of purpose. So really that's the number one thing I think is missing in organisations today.
And this is interesting because, traditionally we've thought about meaning and purpose being derived outside of the workspace, but increasingly the workspace is considered part of the whole person space, isn't it?
I think this is the whole problem that we have with Western thought, in that we like to deductive thinking, like to break things down into boxes. Work is over here and life is over here, as if you could ever separate work from life. And even the term work-life balance for me is a total misnomer. Balance suggests that there's a sense of evenness around these things, and there's no way, because most of us spend more time at work than we do at home, with during the week at least, without then our loved ones at home. So
it occupies a lot of our thinking at the same time, even when we're not at work.
I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person who takes some work home with them on the weekend, at least in their mind. So yeah, absolutely. So this whole idea of work-life balance and separating those things is an issue. So I think if we connect to that purpose, again, to belong to something bigger than ourselves, and that's incredibly powerful. And not enough organisations have tapped into that or realised that. And I guess that's part of my mission with the storytelling.
Who are the exemplars of this that you can point to?
Well, in New Zealand, I love Bob Harvey. So Bob Harvey is a fantastic storyteller. And I saw him do a presentation, and he was using 50 slides in his slideshow, and very few words were on the slides. It was every picture tells a story, and he would put up a slide and he would speak to that. And so he was, but he speaks from the heart, and so I thought, if I think of an excellent storyteller, so Bob Harvey's right up there, and he's done an amazing job right from from his time out west as the mayor of Waitakere, and what he's doing now with Waterfront Auckland is an amazing story.
And within the corporate space and globally, are there other people that kind of stand out for you that you think really embrace this type of thing?
Well, if you look at fantastic orators, and you don't have to be, and this is one of the point I'm making, is you don't have to be the Martin Luther Kings, the Winston Churchills,
Barack Obama,
exactly. You don't have to be that kind of a charismatic leader to be a good storyteller. I think a lot of the charisma comes from the things that these people have done, and I worked with a managing director who was loved by his people, but was a terrible public speaker. He'd close himself right off and would look at his shoes to the point where they put a little smiley face on his shoes and with the words "look up," to remind him to look up. But he had a very high trust, and integrity was a very core value, and people loved him. His people loved him. So. But globally, people like Barack Obama, very, very impressive orators. But I think that's a nice to have, not necessarily you must be at that scale to be an effective storyteller.
So really, it's about the story. It's about being able to tell the story, and not necessarily about the way that you tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be lovely to be everyone to be like a Barack Obama, but I think it is. And the key thing and again, depending, whether it's you're telling the story that reveals you or a vision, it has to be authentic. It has to be authentic, and that comes back to why one story will not fit all. You need to have. It needs to be personalised. You need to personalise the story so it comes from your heart, because we're quite good at picking up when things are not authentic. When you're looking at somebody speaking and so forth, and we'll take their body language over what they're saying every time. If it's incongruent, it's just like, that didn't sound. I don't trust them. Yeah. Yeah.
And for you, this has turned into a pretty successful business.
Yes, yeah, it's been and it's fantastic. I said some of the work with people, when you see them realise, connect through storytelling of what they're doing on a day-to-day business. I mean, a very simple story to illustrate that point is about the three bricklayers, a well-known story where there's three bricklayers laying bricks, and the first person comes up and, what are you doing? I'm laying bricks. Second person, I'm building a wall. The third bricklayer says, I'm building a cathedral. And I use that story just to let leaders know that most of the time people who go to work are focusing on the day-to-day tasks of their job, and that's laying bricks. Very few of them are thinking about what they do and the wider scale of things. So I remember working with Sealord on storytelling, and there are people within the organisation who stand at the conveyor belts cutting fish for 8 hours a day, an incredibly monotonous job as far as that goes. But these people are highly engaged because they're connected to the fact that what they do for those 8 hours is linked to the customer, the fish that's on their plate, and because they've done a very good job with the storytelling side of things, they have a high level of engagement.
And for yourself, this must create a lot of meaning for you personally, being able to, I guess, make a difference in the world.
Yeah. So all the warm fuzzies are right there with this work. So and I love that being able to use improv away from the stage, and it's been a wonderful gift for me for the last 20 years and how it's impacted my life. So it's nice to be able to share that and see people can do that, whether it's through the storytelling or through the creativity or whatever it may be, to get more meaning in what they do.